Assalamualaikum and good morning, Malaysia. Welcome back to Forum ECO162. My name is Nur Hazika Izzatu binti Muhammad Fazil.
And my name is Nur Humaira binti Nur Azman. Today's episode will cover two better topics of microeconomics. First, consumer behavior, and second, theory of economic distribution. Consumer behavior explains how individuals make choices using limited income to gain maximum satisfaction.
Meanwhile, the theory of economic distribution explores how income is distributed among landowners, workers, capital owners, and entrepreneurs.
Our objective today is to help viewers to understand, to learn, and to apply how these theories affect real-life decision and income equality.
That's right, Myra. Let's start with utilities analysis. Total utility represents the overall levels of satisfaction or benefit that a consumer derive from consuming a certain quantity of goods or service. Mathematically, we write it as where EU is total utility and MU is marginal utility from each end unit consumed. For example, the chocolate cake, the first slice gave me so much joy, like 12 utils of satisfaction. When I had the second slice, it was still good, but only about 9 utils. Then I went for a third slice, and it dropped to 6 utils. Now after the fourth slide, I only feel the 3 utils of happiness. I guess the more I eat, the less extra satisfaction I get from each new slice. That's diminishing marginal utilities.
Speaking of marginal utility, it's the additional satisfaction gained from consuming one more unit of a good.
Right. So the formula is it's mean change in total utility divided by change in quantity.
Now, we also have the law of diminishing marginal utility. This law states that as a person consumes more units of a good, the additional satisfaction from each extra unit decreases, holding other factors constant.
Yes, the assumption include that this remains constant. Income and price do not change. On the graph, we typically see MU curve slopes downwards, showing that marginal utility declines as consumption increases.
Now, we have two special guests, which is Kamara and Hanis. Welcome!
Hello, thank you for having us. My name is Norhani Shazana binti Joni.
And my name is Muhammad Kamaru Hidayatullah bin Ramli.
Okay, Hanis, could you please explain to us about consumer equilibrium?
Of course, today I would like to briefly explain the concept of consumer equilibrium. Particularly through the cardinal approach, consumer equilibrium occurs when a consumer chooses a combination of goods that maximizes satisfaction or utility given a limited income. Under the cardinal approach, utility is seen as measurable, for example, 4 utils, 10 utils, and so on. A consumer reaches equilibrium when the ratio of marginal utility to the price is equal across all goods. This means the consumer gets equal satisfaction from each ringgit spent. Based on figure 4, we can see how price changes affect consumption. At point E1, the marginal utility of good X is greater than its price, so the consumer will buy more. At point E2, MUX equals to PX equals to MUM, and this is where equilibrium is achieved. Maximum satisfaction is reached. If consumption reaches point E3, the satisfaction per ringgit is too low and the consumer will reduce consumption. In short, the cardinal approach helps us understand how rational consumers make decisions to maximize satisfaction through measurable utility and price comparisons.
Oh, and what about the ordinal approach?
Alright, let me now explain the ordinal approach to consumer equilibrium. Unlike the cardinal approach, this method does not measure satisfaction with numbers. Instead, it focuses on how consumers rank their preferences. For example, saying I prefer orange juice over watermelon juice. The main idea is the consumers know which combinations of goods they like more, less, or equally, and they choose what gives them the most satisfaction within their budget. In figure 5, we see the indifference curve, which shows different combinations of two goods that give the same level of satisfaction. As the consumer gets more of good X, they give up some of good Y but remain equally happy. Then, in figure 6, the budget line shows all the combinations of goods the consumer can afford with their income. Finally, in figure 7, we combine both the budget line and indifference curves. The consumer reaches equilibrium at point E, where the budget line touches the curve. This is the best and most affordable choice for the consumer. In short, the ordinal approach helps explain how people choose the best combination of goods based on their preferences and budget, even without using numbers.
Alright, thank you, Anis. Now, Kamaru, can you explain about the theory of economic distribution, starting with wages?
Certainly. So, distribution theory in economics is all about how a country income gets shared among the land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurs. It looks at how things like wages, rent, profit, and interest are decided and how they shape who gets. Now, when we talk about wages, this is the money paid to the workers for the work they do. It has to match what agree in their contract. Wages can come as hourly pays, pay per piece, or even a monthly salary. There are also two types of wages in economics: nominal wages and the real wages. Nominal wages or the money wages is simple the amount of the money a worker gets. It is like in the ringgit Malaysia. But doesn't show how much they can actually buy because it doesn't consider it as inflation. That is why when we look at the real wages adjust for inflation. So it can tell us what a worker can really afford. It shows the true purchases power and standard of living. It also include any extra payment or benefit they might get. Here the formula for real wages. Real wages equal to nominal wages divided by price index. Let me give an example to make this clear. So say my nominal wages, the actually that I money that I get is 2,000, but the price level now is 125. So to find my real wages, I do this. Real wages equal to 2,000 divided by 125, then time with 100. That give me 1,600. This means that even though I pay 2,200, what can I actually buy? My purchasing power is only like earning 1,600 in base year prices. So my real wage show that the income is really worth after considering the highest prices.
Wow, Kamaru, that's a good explanation. Can you explain what wage determination is?
Yeah, sure. So wages are mainly decided by two things: demand for labor and supply of labor. The demand for labor is called a derived demand because it depends on the demand for what workers have to produce. For example, firm hire workers based on how productive they are and how much value they add. The more a worker can produce and help to earn, the more for willing to pay. This is where the marginal revenue product (MRP) comes in. The formula is MRP equal to change in total revenue divide change in labor. Let me give a quick example. Suppose to before hiring a new worker, bakery earn 5,000 per week. After hiring one more worker, the revenue goes up to 6,000. So the change in total revenue is 1,000 and the change in labor is one worker. So MRT equals to 1,000 divided by 1 equal to 1,000 ringgit measure. This means the extra workers bring in 1,000 more each week. If the worker wage is less than 1,000, it makes sense for bakery to hire them because it's profitable. Graphically, the demand curve sloping downwards.
Wow, that's a good explanation, Kamaru. And I would like to know how about supply of labor?
There are three types of perceptive supplies of labor, which are supply of labor in a perfect market, supply of labor to an industry, and supply of labor to indirect economy. In perfect market, many workers and firms set the wages by supplies and demand for each firm. The supply of labor is perfectly elastic, so they can hire so many workers as they add that wages. Graphically horizontal line because there are no single firm that be able to influence the price of good because that is fixed by industry. The supply of labor depends how many people are willing and be able to work in that sector in different wages. Plus, things like working condition and whether the training available, the graphically positive upward sloping because the higher wages will attract more workers and vice versa. For whole economy, the supply of labor can show backward bending curve, meaning that the higher wages, people might work a few hours because the income effect is stronger than substitute effect. So they prefer more leisure over extra works.
Now we have equilibrium wages. How about equilibrium wages?
Equilibrium wages are determined where the labor demand equal to labor supplies. The intersections give us equilibrium wages and employment level. For example, in 2025, where the Malaysia government raised the minimum wage from 1,500 to 1,700, it mainly helped the low income in sector like retail, F&B, and agriculture. But in the construction, they still cannot if attract enough local workers, which mean the real equilibrium wages they are probably higher. So employers keep relying on foreign labor to fill the gaps. But under the perfect competitions, wages equilibriums works differently because the market demand for the labor come to the marginal revenue product where the supply curve of labor to each firm is perfectly elastic, a flat horizontal line, meaning the firm can hire as many workers as they want at the market wages.
Thank you, Kamaru. Now we will hand over to our field reporter Kylie, who's at the public area to explain other types of rewards.
My name is Muhammad Khairi Shafwan bin Yusuf. Thank you, Myra and Azika. Today, I want to talk about rent, interest, and profit. So, I want to start with rent first. Now, when we think about rent, we usually think about paying house, a car, or even a laptop. But in economics, rent means any payment you make for using something that isn't yours for a short time. There are two main theories that explain rent: the Ricardian theory and modern theory. Let's start with Ricardian theory. It is created by an economist named David Ricardo. He said rent is money paid for using land. According to him, land is special because it's fixed. We can create more land. It has different qualities, like some land is more fertile or better located. So land that is more useful earns more rent. For example, land in the middle of Kuala Lumpur will have higher rent than land in a remote village. That's because of its location and usefulness. But Ricardo's idea had problems. He only thought about land and didn't consider that land can be used in many ways, not just for farming. Also, he didn't talk about other things like labor or machines. That's where the modern theory of rent comes in. Modern economists said rent isn't just for land. It can be for any scarce resource. This includes labor, machine, or even skills. For example, if someone really good at graphic design and there are many like them, they can charge more. That extra income is like rent. It's because their skill is scarce and in high demand. Now, rent is determined by supply and demand, just like the prices of most goods. Think about it this way. When the rent for something goes up, people or businesses are less likely to demand it because it's more expensive. That's why the demand curve slopes downward. Higher rent means lower demand. On the other hand, when rent goes up, more people are willing to supply that factor. For example, more landowners might offer their land for farming if the rent is good. So the supply curve slopes upward. Higher rent, higher supply. The equilibrium rent is where the supply and demand curves meet. That's the rent price where the amount supply equals the amount demanded. But there's also another concept called economic rent. While normal rent is just the payment for using something, economic rent is the extra income someone earns above what they actually need to stay in that job or role. So the calculation for economic rent is economic rent equals to actual earnings minus transfer earnings. So in simple terms, economic rent is the bonus or surplus someone earns not because they work harder, but because they are in demand or something in scarce. So now I'm going to explain the concept of transfer earning and economic rent using a supply and demand. So let's look at this graph. The DD curve is the demand curve for a factor of production, like labor or land. The SS curve is the supply curve for that factor. These two curves meet at point E, which is the equilibrium point. At this point, the equilibrium price is 0p and the equilibrium quantity is 0q. This means the market has agreed on the price and quantity for that factor. Now, how do we understand total earnings? The area 0 PEQ represent the total earnings received by the factor. It's simply price multiplied by quantity, just like how salary equals wage per hour times hours worked. But not all of the area is considered economic rent. Let me explain further. The area below the supply curve, which is the area labeled 0 EQ, shows the transfer earnings. Transfer earnings are the minimum amount of money needed to keep that factor, like a worker or a landowner, in its current use. In other words, it's what they would accept to say as to stay. Now, here's where economic rent comes in. The area above the supply curve, but below the price line, 0p, that's the economic rent. This is the extra income or surplus that the factor earns over and above what's required to keep it in use. I'm going to explain how the supply of a factor of production affects economic rent, and I'll walk you through three different supply curve scenarios. Let's start with the first one. In this figure, the supply curve is perfectly elastic. That means the supply line is completely horizontal. No matter how much is demanded, the price stays the same. Here's the supply demand curves meet at point E. The quantity used is 0q and the equilibrium rent is 0r. The total income earned is shown by the area 0REQ. But here's the important part. Because the supply is perfectly elastic, the factor can be supplied in any amount at the same price, and all earnings are just transfer earnings. That means the factor is earning exactly what needed to stay in use. There's no economic rent at all. Now let's look at figure 2. This time the supply curve is perfectly inelastic, which means it's a vertical line. That means the quantity of the factor cannot change, no matter how the rent is. The demand curve still slopes downward and meets the supply at point E. The quantity used is again 0q and the rent is 0r. Here's the difference. Since the supply is fixed and the factor has no alternative use, the transfer earnings are zero. It doesn't need to be paid anything to stay in that job. So the entire income, shown by area 0 REQ, is economic rent. In other words, it's all surplus. Now, let's move to figure 3, where things are more realistic. In this figure, the supply curve is upward sloping. That means as rent increases, more of the factor is supplied because suppliers are more willing to offer it. The demand and supply curve meet at point E, with rent per unit at 0R and quantity used at 0Q. The total income again shown as 0REQ is now divided into two parts. The lower part, 0EQ, is the transfer earnings, the minimum amount needed to keep the factor in use. The upper part, the area above the supply curve and below the price, is the economic rent, the surplus earned. So now, we are going to the second part of the discussion. So, the second part is profit. I'm going to explain it in a very simple way. Profit is the money left after a business pays all its costs. We can use this formula. Profit equals to total revenue minus total cost. Now, there are two types of profit. Normal profit happens when total revenue is exactly the same as total cost. This is called break even. The business is covering everything but not making extra. Economic profit happens when total revenue is more than total cost. This means the business is making extra gains. It's doing well. Profit is important because it motivates entrepreneurs to take risk, start businesses, and create new ideas. It also shows how successful a business is. So, in short, no profit the business just survives. Extra profit, the business grows and succeeds. And remember the key formula, total profit equals to total revenue minus total cost. So now we are going for the last discussion. I'm going to explain interest. Interest is basically the cost of borrowing money on the reward for lending it. If I loan someone 100 ringgit at a 5% interest rate, they'll pay me 5 ringgit extra. Now, there are two types of interest rates. Nominal interest rate, the basic rate like 5%. It's what the bank advertises. The second one, real interest rate. This tells me what I actually earn after inflation. If inflation is 2 ringgit, my real return is only 3%. But how are interest rate decided? Two main ideas explain this. Loanable funds theory, it's like a market for loans. More savings equals to lower rates. More borrowing equals to higher rates. The second one is liquidity preference theory. People like having cash handy. Interest is the reward for parting with that cash. Higher rates make people lend more. So, remember the key formula, real interest rate equals to nominal interest rate minus inflation rate. So, if my savings account pays 4%, nominal and inflation is 1.5%, my real return is just 2.5%. That's what really matters. Okay, let's understand how interest rates are set in the market. So, let's look at the graph. There's something called the loanable funds market, where DL, demands for loan, SL, supply of loans. The interest rate is decided where these two meet at point E. The equilibrium interest rate R, the amount of money being lent equal to borrowed is M. So the key thing to remember is higher interest rates equal to people save more. SL increases. Higher interest rates equal to fewer people borrow equals to DL decreases. It's just like any market price. Interest rate balance what's available and what's wanted. Okay, that is all from me. We're going back to the studio.
Thanks, Khairi, for the comprehensive explanations. Now we pass it to Mirza, who will discuss policy recommendations.
My name is Mirza Afka bin Kamarul. Thank you to Azika and Mayra in the studio. Right now, I'm here at UiTM Sigamat and I will explain to you guys about policy recommendation. Let's start with the main goal. We want to make sure every nation has access to basic needs like food, education, healthcare, and a fair chances at a better life. One way the government help is through subsidies. This means the government pays part of the cost so people can afford things like fuel, education, and healthcare. It's very helpful, especially during tough times. Next is price control. The government sets a maximum price for important items like rice, eggs, and petrol. This helps stop prices from going too high, especially during festivals or emergencies. We also have the minimum wage policy. In 2024, the minimum wage was set at 1,700 ringgit per month. This helps workers earn a fair income. With this money, they can buy food, pay bills, and support their families. Another important part is education support. The government gives scholarships and financial help, especially for Bumi students from poor or rural areas. For example, Mara scholarships help good students to continue their studies even overseas. Now, let's talk about how to make things fairer in the long term. First is wage fairness. Everyone should have equal access to education and skill training. When people learn more, they can get better jobs and earn more money. This helps lift families out of poverty. Second, rent control. Houses and apartments are getting expensive. The government can help by building more affordable homes for the B40 and M40. This keeps rent low so families can live comfortably without spending too much. Third, we need profit optimization. This means companies must pay taxes honestly. When they do, the government can use that money to improve things like school, hospitals, and public transport. To support all these policies, here are two real-world examples. First is BRIM, which is Bantuan Rakyat Satu Malaysia. This was a cash aid program that gave money directly to low-income groups. It helped a lot of people manage their daily costs. Second is PTPTN, the education loan. It helps students, especially from the A40 and B40 groups, to continue the studies after school. With PTPTN, students can focus on their studies. That's all from me. Thank you. And we are back with Hazika and Myra in the studio.
Now we are back in the studio. Today we already have explored how consumer behavior shapes individual choices and how income is distributed among the factors of production.
Yes, we have explored utilities analysis, consumer equilibrium, the theory of distribution, and policy measures. All this help us understand how microeconomic force shape our life. This concept help us see how microeconomic force affects of our daily life and income equality.
We hope this discussion has given you insights you can apply in real life situations. Thank you to all our guests and reporters. That's all for today's ECO162 forum. Stay tuned, stay informed. Goodbye.